Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Falls City, Washington, Monday, October 21st, 5 o'clock a.m. Yes, it has happened. Again. Mark Humiston and his family seem to have it all. Mark was an engineer and his wife a registered nurse. They had 5 children. Mark had moved his family from Texas to Washington State, where he worked as an electrical engineer for the Seattle-based consulting firm Hargis Engineers. In 2019, the Humistons bought a house in Falls City, a suburb 25 miles outside of Seattle. Actually, house is the completely wrong term for this place. It was a 4-story mansion on the lake. Literally. And speaking of life in Falls City, it only has a population of a little over 2,000 people, so you got McMansions in Mayberry. It was as perfect a vision of the American dream as the white media could have conjured, but this dream would turn into a complete nightmare. On Monday, the Kings County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call around 5 o'clock a.m. The caller said that his 13-year-old brother had just shot my whole family and committed suicide too at their home. The reason that he gave was that the 13-year-old had gotten in trouble for looking at pornography. The caller was identified as a 15-year-old sibling, and the people he was reporting as dead were his father, Mark Humiston, and his mother, Sarah, along with 4 of his siblings, Benjamin, Joshua, Catherine, and a 4th one who had not been identified by the white media. Though at that same time as that call was coming in, 911 dispatchers were also receiving a second call, this time from a neighbor who lived about a quarter mile away. That neighbor said that an 11-year-old girl of the slain family had run to his house and was bleeding from what appeared to be a gunshot wound. The girl had said to the authorities her entire family had been fatally shot, but she identified her 15-year-old brother, Andrew Humiston, as the gunman. The girl told dispatchers Andrew had shot her and then described holding her breath and playing dead. The girl had later told detectives she had escaped through a bedroom window. She said that her father had kept a pistol in a small lockbox that he would sometimes put by the front door so he could bring it to work, according to documents. She told detectives that Andrew was the only one who knew the combination to the Glock lockbox. Investigators determined that Andrew systematically murdered his parents and siblings, and then, diabolically, he staged the scene prior to the arrival of first responders to try to make it appear that the murders had been committed by his dead brother. The court documents don't speculate on a motive, but the 11-year-old survivor told investigators that Andrew had recently gotten into trouble for failing tests at school, and that the handgun he used belonged to their father. Of all the children, she said, Andrew was the only one who knew the code to the lockbox that their dad kept the gun in. Now, what I find interesting is that the girl said her father would take his gun to work. This guy, Mark Humiston, worked as an electrical engineer, not a cop. Why would a man who's been described as both a software and electrical engineer, who lived in a tiny town, be packing heat to go work in Seattle if he's going to be behind a keyboard all day? This is a cultural issue that nobody dares talk about. And that goes for Andrew Humiston, too. Why did he feel that he had the right to slaughter his entire family? What thought process would make him think that that was the right thing to do? And then afterwards, why would he attempt to blame and frame one of his victims? This is a nauseating amount of evil at work here. Is it perhaps because he was socialized to believe that he could do no wrong? He's never been told no and could spend his entire life being psychologically coddled by the white media and physically pampered by society. Perhaps he had been conditioned to see everyone as being an abstraction except for himself. Only he is real, only his feelings matter, only his life matters. And do we see this same immorality in the society at large? Privilege plus gunpowder equals tragedy. We keep hearing the white media talking about small-town values. Well, this killer was a product of a small town. He had been living in Falls City for at least the last 5 years, which meant that he had been there since age 10. I think we can all agree that his father didn't give him the combination to the gun safe as a 10-year-old because he didn't give it to the 11-year-old daughter. So whatever warped, twisted mentality this killer devolved into, it happened during his time in Falls City. And as I've chronicled for you over and over, we keep seeing these mass murders happening in these small towns. And yet the white media and much of the country still romanticizes so-called small-town life as being the quintessential Americana, the real America. Because of course the big cities where things actually get made, I guess that's not real because too many black people live there, I suppose. Now, yesterday, Andrew was finally charged with murder for the deaths of his family and attempted murder for the attempted killing of his 11-year-old sister. And predictably, the lionization of this mass murderer by the white media and the local authorities has already begun, with the white media reporting that the public defenders representing Andrew say that he is a 15-year-old boy who enjoys mountain biking and fishing and has no criminal history. Why not talk about his favorite comic books while they're at it? I first came across this story when I saw a video of the local sheriff's office doing a press conference. The all but sympathetic way they were talking about him, describing him as a person in custody who, as they put it, is in significant trouble, downplaying it, minimizing it, as if he had broken a neighbor's window and not just murdered 5 people and attempted to kill a 6th. You know, the same weekend of this massacre, 6 people had been shot and killed in the entire city of Chicago. Falls City has a population of a little over 2,000 people. Chicago has a population of over 2 million. These are small-town values that don't get talked about. The single biggest overall influencer of crime is poverty. You see, a lack of resources brings about a domino effect of all kinds of social dysfunction and aberrations. Now, with all the material resources monopolized by the dominant society, they should be the most happy, most well-adjusted, most peaceful, most law-abiding, and non-violent sector of the society. They literally have nothing to be unhappy about. But instead, we see the opposite. This incident is a typical case study of that. You got a small town here, people living in a 4-story mansion in the middle of a little hamlet that most folks have never heard of, and they're living in a mansion on the lake. They got all the creature comforts you could ask for, nothing that would bring about dysfunction or even dissatisfaction. And yet, as I've chronicled for you time and time and time again, this is where these slaughters keep happening, and nobody wants to ask why, because to do so would be to indict the privileges and perks that society has given to certain people. You won't see any small-town white pastors asking why this keeps happening, no marches for peace in these hamlets. Meth is killing so many people from the dominant society, it's lowering their population numbers. And yet the white media doesn't get out the cameras and microphones and try to platform somebody from their community who'll get in front of the cameras and say, we've got to stop killing each other. And I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that this family came from Texas. A lot of people do what he did. They live in these large areas, and that they leave the urban centers to get away from urban sprawl and congested highways. But for a lot of them, they think that they're getting away from certain people. And while I could care less about anyone's personal motivations for where they moved to, the problem is a lot of them spread the lie that black people are the main perpetrators of crime and such, and that's what ran them out of the cities, which is a lie. You certainly don't move to Falls City because it's more affordable. Falls City is ranked 29th out of 273 cities in the U.S. for cost of living. And you definitely don't go to Falls City because you're looking for lower housing prices, because the median house price in Falls City is over $1.25 million. You certainly don't move to Falls City for good schools because the Humistons were homeschooling their children. So it certainly wasn't good schools that brought the Humistons there. It was Mr. Humiston's career prospects. That's what brought him there. The same thing with everyone else. This family was never harmed when they lived in Texas, though. Mr. Humiston never had his entire family wiped out before, certainly. He left the safety of Texas to go live in this secluded area up north in a nice 4-story mansion. And when he took his gun to work, he felt that he was merely making sure he could protect himself against, well, considering that the population up there is so small, I don't know who he was protecting himself against. What a shame. The threat to his life was coming from inside his own house. Already the predictable efforts to sweep this under the rug are underway, just like all the other big massacres in these small towns. The white media and the other powers that be are not interested in saving lives. Their priority is saving face and preserving what they see as their privileges and creature comforts that make it where this system of racial oppression seems worth it. The outrage is muted, and any talk of making the societal and legal changes required to prevent these slaughters will be even more muted. This society decided a long time ago that the frequent massacres like these are merely the cost of doing business. The American social order must be maintained at all costs, and there will never be a spotlight put on the suburbs or these rural areas out in the sticks to ask why this keeps happening there. There's an old saying that when people ask for advice, it's usually because they already know the answer, but wish that they didn't. Well, when it comes to these crimes, the dominant society, when they pretend that they wonder how can they stop the bloodshed, it's because they already know, but the price would be too high. Seems they think the near daily sacrifice of their own children is a far lower cost than endangering their privilege and the social order they depend on. And so, the bloodshed will continue, no matter where you live. And that's this Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Coco Sweets, Ricketta, Jesse Good, Kenneth Prescia, and Kenneth Dickerson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.